Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
I am really looking forward to this one.
Me too. So imagine being so profoundly intelligent, like so armed with all this analytical processing power, that your own intellect is actually the exact thing that gets you killed.
Right. It sounds totally backwards.
It really does. But today, we're jumping into this deep dive by opening up a pretty strange, kind of fragmented collection of ancient fables.
Yeah, and these texts feature everything from talking trees begging for their lives to literally demon-infested waters.
Which sounds completely wild.
It is. But our mission here today is far from just, basic literary appreciation. We are using these ancient animal allegories as this sort of anti-overload filter.
Right, to extract some really sharp, incredibly practical insights for the 21st century.
Exactly. Because, to just frame this for you, the listener, we completely understand the environment you are operating in right now.
Yeah.
You're likely juggling these complex career vectors, intricate personal relationships, and just this relentless daily avalanche of data.
The cognitive load is staggering. I mean, we all feel it.
We do. And what we have in front of us today functions as a timeless mechanism for cutting right through all that modern noise.
Yeah, because these texts basically force us to step outside of our immediate anxieties, right?
Exactly. They let us observe human behavior from a safe, objective distance using the proxy of, magical realism and anthropomorphized animals.
So the overarching theme binding our source material today is this eternal, really high-stakes tension between raw intellect, or like relentless ambition, and grounded, practical common sense.
Yes, it's the ultimate battle between how smart you are on paper and how aware you are in reality.
Which is such a massive distinction.
It really is, because the texts relentlessly expose the specific human vulnerability. They show the mechanics of how we become blinded.
Blinded by our own greed, mostly.
Greed, yes, but also by our compulsive need to overcomplicate really simple threats.
Oh, yeah. And by the seductive echo chambers of just terrible advice.
Right. The core thesis across all these fragments is that simple, grounded awareness is the ultimate survival tool.
Because high intelligence, when it's decoupled from that basic situational awareness, it doesn't just fail to save you.
No, it actively accelerates your trajectory right toward disaster.
Okay, let's lay a bit of groundwork before we actually get into the stories themselves. Because, these aren't just random bedtime stories written to entertain kids.
Far from it. These fragments mirror the really rich tradition of ancient wisdom literature.
Specifically the Panchatantra tradition, right, from India.
Exactly. And it is crucial to understand the original, functional design of these narratives. They were engineered as literal manuals of statecraft.
Wow. So they were textbooks, basically.
Yeah, pedagogical tools designed to teach survival, strategy, game theory, and diplomacy to royalty.
Young princes, mainly.
Right. Young princes who were destined to inherit power. They desperately needed to understand the brutal, deceptive realities of the world without being destroyed by them first.
So the authors use the animal kingdom as this sort of Trojan horse.
That's a great way to put it.
Because if you sit a young, arrogant prince down and just give him a lecture about his own stupidity, his ego defensive walls go up instantly.
Oh, completely. He shuts down.
But if you tell him a story about a foolish monkey or an overthinking fish, the lesson just slips right past those defenses.
It's a brilliant pedagogical strategy because beneath that surface layer of talking animals, you have these incredibly sophisticated, very adult discussions.
Dissecting treaties, alliances, duplicity, peace.
Yeah, and the really complex psychology of satisfaction.
Right.
The authors basically mapped human political and social dynamics right onto the wilderness.
Creating a safe sandbox for analyzing catastrophic human error.
Exactly.
Which brings us perfectly to the first catastrophic error.
Okay.
Let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
The source introduces us to this text fragment featuring 2 fish and a frog. And the names of the fish are just the first major clue to the psychological profile we're dissecting here.
Right. The names are 100-wit and 1,000-wit.
Which is so funny.
Well, the nomenclature is deliberate, We are dealing with entities defined entirely by their massive cognitive capacity.
So the story sets up this seemingly simple crisis.
Yeah.
100-wit and 1,000-wit are sharing a body of water with this frog.
Just hanging out.
Yeah. But then fishermen arrive with nets.
The ultimate crisis for a fish.
Exactly. Now, conventional logic suggests that the entities with 1,000 wits would instantly devise this impenetrable escape strategy, right?
You would certainly think so.
But the text gives us this really vivid, almost brutal subversion of that expectation. The fishermen gleefully trap the overly clever fish.
Just scoop them right up.
Yeah. The fragment specifically notes that the fishermen carry away 100 wit and 1,000 wit, and the fish are just limp and dead.
It's a really dark image.
It is. Meanwhile, the supposedly basic, intellectually inferior frog simply buries itself in the water and the mud, completely safe.
The frog survives.
And the frog even points out the dead fish to its mate, saying, "Luke, darling, limp and dead."
Wow. It's a dark, very punchy resolution to a very complex cognitive problem.
My immediate reaction to reading this was like recognizing the exact mechanics of corporate analysis paralysis.
Oh, definitely.
But I want to push back on the premise for a second, just to play devil's advocate.
Sure.
I refuse to believe that intelligence is inherently a disadvantage. I mean, why did the immense calculating intellect of 1,000 wit actually fail against a couple of guys with a net?
Well, what's fascinating here is that intelligence itself isn't the disadvantage.
Okay, and what is?
Uncalibrated intelligence is the liability. What we are observing here is the psychological trap of over-engineering solutions.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The authors are illustrating this fatal disconnect between high-level analytical processing and immediate grounded reality.
Like being too smart for your own good.
Exactly. In cognitive psychology, we talk about System 1 and System 2 thinking.
Right, Daniel Kahneman stuff.
Yes. System 1 is fast, instinctual, and heuristic. System 2 is slow, deliberate, and highly algorithmic.
So the fish are just totally stuck in System 2.
Completely stuck. They are running these exhaustive algorithms while the net is literally closing around them.
So they're just overthinking it while they get caught.
Precisely. I mean, we can easily extrapolate the internal monologue of 1,000 wit here. The threat appears.
The net goes into the water.
Right. And instead of just reacting, the fish begins calculating the exact trajectory of the descending net.
Analyzing the geometric mesh size.
Yes. Debating the optimal angle of hydrodynamic deflection. Maybe even running like a game theory matrix on the socioeconomic motivations of the fishermen.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
But also tragic.
It is, because while that massive intellectual processing power was engaged in high-level abstraction, the physical net just closed.
They literally thought themselves to death.
They did.
It's like, okay, think about a self-driving car equipped with a supercomputer.
Okay, I like this analogy.
Right. A snowflake falls in front of the sensors, and the AI is so incredibly busy calculating the physics, the weight, and the crystalline structure of the snowflake.
Just to determine the optimal braking pressure.
Yes. And while it's doing all that, it drives straight into a brick wall. The processing power actually becomes the literal cause of the crash.
That is an exceptional analogy. The system crashes because it prioritizes exhaustive analysis over immediate contextual awareness.
Wow. Yeah.
The frog, conversely, did not possess 1,000 wits.
No, just the one wit, maybe.
Right. The frog could not run those calculations. The frog relied on a really basic evolutionary heuristic.
Which was just what? Danger approaches. Jump in the mud.
Yes. It is a fast, frugal, and highly effective cognitive shortcut.
It's beautifully boring, honestly. Just jump in the mud.
It is boring.
It doesn't scale, it doesn't look impressive on a resume or a LinkedIn post, but, it keeps you breathing.
Exactly. The frog survived because it possessed practical wisdom, what ancient philosophers called phronesis.
Phronesis, I love that.
It is the ability to navigate the visceral reality of the present moment without getting entirely lost in the abstractions of the mind.
So 1,000 wit really suffered from an arrogance of intellect.
He absolutely did. He was so enamored with his own mental capacity that he forgot his physical reality.
He forgot he was fundamentally just a fish in a pond with a net coming at him.
Exactly.
This feels like sort of glaring indictment of how modern society operates right now.
Oh, without a doubt.
We completely fetishize the 1,000 wit mindset. I mean, if a solution isn't incredibly convoluted, we just assume it lacks value.
We culturally worship complexity.
We really do.
We see it in the reverence for tech gurus who promise to, disrupt basic fundamental human interactions with these labyrinthine algorithms.
Or the financial sector, right?
Oh, heavily in the financial sector. You had 1,000 wits constructing derivatives and collateralized debt obligations so phenomenally complex that even their creators didn't fully understand the risk mechanisms.
And that ultimately contributed to catastrophic global economic failures.
Right. The complexity was an illusion of control.
And we see it on an individual personal level, too.
Oh, so?
Well, think about the person who adopts this hyper-optimized 12-step morning routine.
Oh, yeah.
They're doing cold plunges, wearing biometric tracking rings, microdosing, just to start their day.
Yeah.
But they completely ignore the basic heuristic of just, getting 8 hours of sleep.
Yes. We view the frog as basic. We view sleeping 8 hours as basic.
Right.
But the frog is alive. The frog is functioning optimally within its actual environment.
So for you, the person listening to this deep dive right now,
Mm-hmm.
you are likely managing a massive array of moving parts in your career, your business, or your household.
A lot of complexity.
So where in your life are you currently acting like Thousand Wit? Think about a really complex problem you're facing right now.
Are you trying to solve a fundamental communication breakdown with your team by researching massive, incredibly expensive software integration projects?
Right. When the reality is, the problem might just require a simple, frog-like solution.
It might just require walking across the hall, sitting down, and having an honest 5-minute conversation.
Stop trying to outsmart the net.
Sometimes the mud is the safest, smartest place to be.
But, overthinking an immediate threat is only half the danger we face.
True.
The real tragedy, according to these texts, happens when we don't just misread a threat, but we completely misread an opportunity.
Right. The failure to manage a sudden advantage.
Which brings us to a highly evocative, super multi-layered fragment, the story of the Weaver.
This one is fascinating.
It really is. The narrative paints a really vivid picture of desperation here. We have a weaver whose family is quite literally starving because he lacks the wood necessary to build his loom and ply his trade.
He's hit rock bottom.
Exactly. Driven by sheer desperation, he travels down to the seashore, intent on cutting down this massive, ancient tree.
A huge undertaking.
Right. He raises his axe, and suddenly, the tree speaks.
The text utilizes a really beautiful deployment of magical realism here to establish the stakes.
And the tree begs for its life. The imagery the source provides is stunning, actually. The tree pleads with the weaver, explaining that its body is caressed by ocean billows.
It's not just a piece of lumber. It's a living entity with a deep connection to its environment.
But the weaver counters with his own visceral reality. If he doesn't cut the tree down, his family starves to death.
The stakes are absolute survival on both sides.
Exactly. So, to preserve its own existence, the tree offers the weaver a magical boon. The weaver can have absolutely any wish he desires in exchange for just sparing the tree.
We move instantly from a crisis of survival to a crisis of sudden, unlimited leverage.
And the weaver actually demonstrates a flash of practical wisdom initially, doesn't he?
He does. He tells the tree that before he makes a decision of this magnitude, he must go home and consult his wife.
Which is smart. He recognizes the need to confer with his foundational partnership.
But on the journey home, he runs into a friend.
The dreaded friend.
The introduction of the external advisor. This is where the psychological architecture of the fable gets incredibly intricate.
So the weaver enthusiastically details this magical boon to his friend. And the friend immediately counters the weaver's plan to consult his wife.
He steps right in.
Yeah, he offers his own strategy. He says, ask to be a king. That way, we can both taste the delights of the world to come.
We can both taste the delights. Keep that phrasing in mind.
I know, right? When the weaver hesitates, reiterating his desire to speak with his spouse, the friend explicitly warns him against it.
He pushes back hard.
The source text has the friend quoting a proverb, stating flatly, don't consult women.
And this specific interaction introduces a really profound historical and cultural obstacle for the modern reader.
Okay, yeah, here's where it gets really interesting, because I have to stop the narrative here. This is where the text becomes incredibly jarring.
It is jarring.
You have this beautiful ethical dilemma established between the starving family and the ancient ocean-swept tree. And then suddenly, you are hit with this overtly sexist instruction from the friend. It completely stops you in your tracks.
It really does. This raises an important question, though, and it requires a highly discerning approach to ancient literature.
How so?
Well, we are engaging with a document generated within a deeply patriarchal, ancient societal structure. The social assumptions and biases of that specific era are inherently baked right into the narrative fabric.
Right, the systemic patriarchy of the time.
Exactly. The friend's dismissal of the wife, the instruction not to consult women, is a clear reflection of that. It likely stems from ancient political doctrines that advised rulers to keep their counsel strictly within a male-dominated inner circle.
Right. So as modern readers, we obviously reject the misogynistic construction entirely.
Oh, completely. It is a historical artifact. It's a relic of its time, not a piece of enduring wisdom.
But, and this is key, if we just throw the text away, because of that artifact, we miss the actual mechanism of what the friend is doing.
That is the exact translation of the core wisdom here.
Because the sexism is the vehicle, but the underlying psychological tactic is isolation.
Spot on. If we look past the cultural baggage of that specific line, the structural warning the author provides is universally relevant. The friend is executing a classic manipulation tactic.
He's isolating him.
He is deliberately steering the weaver away from his foundational, grounded partnership.
His marriage. The person who shares his daily reality of starvation and struggle.
Right. And he's steering him toward a massive, ego-driven fantasy instead. The enduring truth here is a stark warning.
Which is?
Be incredibly vigilant about who you allow to influence your major life choices, especially in moments of sudden opportunity.
Let's pull this right into the 21st century. How often do we experience a boon in life?
It happens more than we think.
Right. It doesn't have to be a magical tree.
Yeah.
It could be a sudden promotion to the C-suite, a massive, unexpected financial windfall, maybe a successful startup exit.
Or even a sudden burst of viral internet fame. A sudden nonlinear influx of power, capital, or status.
In the very moment that happens, people immediately come out of the woodwork to offer their quote-unquote advice.
Oh, the advisors swarm.
The friend in this fable is the absolute ultimate archetype of the toxic, opportunistic advisor. Notice his phrasing, like you pointed out earlier. Ask to be king so WE can both taste the delights.
He is projecting his own dormant, greedy ambitions onto the weaver's unique opportunity.
He views the weaver's boon not as a solution to the weaver's problems, but as a vehicle for his own ascension.
Exactly. The friend isn't factoring in the weaver's complete lack of qualifications for kingship.
Or his temperament.
Or the fact that his family just desperately needs a working loom to survive. He just sees a free ride to power. Make yourself a king so I can ride your coattails.
But to successfully hijack the boon, the friend must first sever the weaver's connection to reality.
He has to cut off the voice of reason.
Right. Because if the weaver goes home to his wife, they will likely discuss the practicalities. I mean, they need wood. Maybe they ask for a lifetime supply of lumber or enough gold to buy a workshop.
A grounded, practical application of the boon?
Exactly. The friend knows that if the weaver speaks to someone rooted in his actual life, the grand, delusional fantasy of becoming a king just evaporates entirely.
It is the echo chamber of bad advice. Whenever you face a major life transition or acquire new leverage, you will inevitably find voices urging you to maximize your status.
To grab the crowd.
Yes, to monetize every single waking moment of your life. And what is critical to observe here is the risk asymmetry.
Oh, that's a great point. Risk asymmetry.
The friend bears absolutely none of the risk if the weaver fails as a king. The friend doesn't have to rule the kingdom, he just wants to attend the banquet.
Wow. It's the guy at your company who tells you to leverage your new executive salary to buy a massive depreciating asset like a yacht, mostly just so he has somewhere to drink on the weekend.
Exactly.
Or the colleague pushing you to launch a hostile takeover of another department, knowing they get the prestige of being your ally, but you take the public fall if it crashes and burns.
The psychology is so insidious because these toxic advisors often frame their parasitic ambition as, like, a belief in your potential.
Right, they stroke your ego.
They do. The weaver went to the beach with a singular, grounded purpose: to get wood to feed his family. Within minutes of encountering this friend, he is genuinely contemplating becoming a monarch.
It demonstrates how incredibly fragile our sense of purpose becomes when exposed to flattery and toxic ambition.
It really does.
So the practical application for you, the listener, is to do an immediate audit of your advisory board.
A personal audit.
Yeah. When you are granted an opportunity, a promotion, a moment of leverage, a windfall, whose voice is the loudest in your head?
Good question.
Are you consulting the people who actually share the trenches of your daily life? The people who know your inherent flaws, who understand your authentic needs, and who will still be there if the boon just vanishes tomorrow?
Or are you listening to a quote-unquote friend who is subtly maneuvering your opportunity to serve their own agenda?
It requires extreme discernment to separate those who share your reality from those who merely wish to share your success.
It is one of the hardest skills to develop.
So listening to a parasitic advisor is a fast track to ruining your life. But an even faster track perhaps the absolute most direct route to catastrophe, is failing to read the environment around you entirely.
Walking blindly right into a trap because you lack situational awareness.
Exactly. And that brings us to what is undoubtedly the most brilliant strategic mind in these texts, the monkey chief.
This narrative provides a literal masterclass in behavioral restraint. It touches on the cognitive neuroscience of observation.
The scene here is incredibly tense. We have a monkey king, a chief, leading his troop of princes through the wilderness.
And they are out of their element.
Right. He initiates a very stern, preemptive speech to his followers. He essentially calls them fools for being driven by their immediate appetites.
He's trying to set ground rules.
He warns them that giving in to the greed for unfamiliar fruit or water in an unknown environment will inevitably result in their deaths. He is trying to establish a baseline of operational security.
He is attempting to override their biological impulses with strategic discipline.
Which is hard to do.
Very hard.
And that discipline is immediately tested. The troop is parched. They discover a watering hole, a beautiful, refreshing lake in the middle of the wilderness.
It looks perfect.
Oh, it looks like salvation. The young impulsive monkeys are likely surging forward, ready to just dive right in and quench their thirst.
But the monkey chief enforces a hard stop.
He approaches the edge of the water and notices this terrifying, subtle anomaly. He sees footsteps in the mud leading directly into the lake, but he sees absolutely zero footsteps coming out.
The tracks only go in. It is one of the most chilling, effective images in the entire collection.
It's like a horror movie setup. If the tracks only go in, the monkey chief deduces that something inside that water is ensuring nothing ever leaves.
A very logical deduction.
So, maintaining a strict, safe distance, he devises a workaround. He doesn't abandon the resource entirely. I mean, they still desperately need the water to survive.
Right, they can't just leave.
But he refuses to submerge himself.
Yeah.
So he finds a hollow lotus reed and uses it essentially as a giant straw, drinking from the lake while remaining entirely on the dry, safe shore.
He extracts the necessary resource without exposing himself to the hidden vulnerability.
And his deduction is proven instantly correct. A water demon emerges from the depths of the lake.
The trap is revealed.
The demon reveals himself and casually confirms that he consumed all the previous visitors in one fell swoop. But fascinatingly, the demon actually praises the monkey chief.
Just why?
The monster respects the monkey's analytical brilliance in bypassing the trap.
The predator recognizes the superior game theory of the prey.
This is the ultimate read the room moment.
Right.
I want to unpack exactly how the monkey chief's brain functioned here, because it really goes against our default programming, doesn't it?
It goes against everything we are wired to do.
If I'm a thirsty monkey, my brain sees the water, and then my brain sees the footprints going in, and I probably rationalize it by thinking, oh, look, other people found this water too. It must be a great, safe spot.
You are describing survivorship bias, basically, combined with the fact that the human brain, and the primate brain in general, is biologically wired to detect presence, not absence.
Okay, let's dig into that mechanism. What do you mean by detecting presence?
Well, from an evolutionary standpoint, our sensory systems are highly optimized to alert us to sudden stimuli.
Like things jumping out at us.
Exactly. A loud crack of a branch, a flash of bright color in the brush, a sudden movement in our peripheral vision. These are positive data points, things that are visibly there. It requires almost zero cognitive effort to notice a roar. However, it takes a highly trained, deeply disciplined, and suspicious mind to notice what is missing. The concept of negative space.
Negative space.
The monkey chief didn't see the demon. The demon was perfectly camouflaged underwater. What the chief saw was an absence. The absence of returning footprints.
It totally reminds me of how intelligence analysts are trained. They look for the quote-unquote dog that didn't bark in the night. The absence of an expected event is often the loudest warning siren.
Precisely. And if we apply this to the context of the original text, which, remember, was written as a manual of statecraft, the water demon is a huge metaphor.
What does the demon represent?
The demon represents the hidden, destructive clauses in a seemingly lucrative treaty. It represents the toxic, manipulative dynamics hidden behind the charm of a new political alliance. It is the architect of any scenario that appears too good to be true.
Let's pull that right into the modern corporate environment. The refreshing watering hole looks like absolute salvation to a thirsty monkey, just as a massive sign-on bonus and a prestigious title looks like salvation to a burned-out executive.
Absolutely.
But if you look at the company's LinkedIn profile and see that they have incredibly high hiring rates, but absolutely zero employees who have stayed longer than 8 months, well, the tracks only go in.
The turnover rate is the missing footprints. If you dive into that corporate culture, the demon, whether that's a toxic CEO, unsustainable working hours, or illegal practices, will consume you.
If the tracks only go in, it doesn't matter how thirsty you are walking into a predator's mouth.
You are.
But what I find so compelling is the psychological pause. The young monkeys felt the stimulus thirst, and their immediate response was to jump.
System 1 thinking again.
Right. The monkey chief felt the exact same biological thirst, but he injected a gap between the stimulus and the response.
You are touching on a fundamental concept of Stoic philosophy here.
Oh, really?
Yes. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus focused heavily on what he called prohairesis, or our capacity for rational choice.
Prohairesis.
Right. Between the stimulus, which is thirst, and the response jumping in, there is a microsecond of space. In that space lies our total freedom to choose.
So the monkey chief utilized that space.
He did. He observed reality first, allowing his analytical system 2 to override his biological system 1.
But the true genius is that he didn't just walk away. I mean, it's easy to say, well, there's a demon in there. I guess my team will just die of thirst in the desert.
Right. He didn't give up.
He didn't capitulate to the danger, and he didn't ignore it. He found the lotus reed.
The lotus reed is the crucial operational takeaway here. It represents the establishment of a strategic boundary.
A boundary.
Yes. It is the mechanism by which we interact with necessary but highly dangerous environments on our own terms, extracting value without full submersion.
Think about social media. It's the ultimate modern manifestation of a demon-infested watering hole.
It truly is.
The tracks go in, and people's attention spans, their mental health, their self-esteem, it never comes out.
It is a profound parallel. If you completely submerge yourself in the social media lake, if you are doom scrolling for 4 hours a night, engaging in toxic, adrenaline-fueled arguments with absolute strangers, and outsourcing your self-worth to algorithmic engagement metrics, the demon consumes you.
You lose your cognitive focus and your peace of mind.
Completely.
But for many professionals, I mean freelancers, journalists, marketers, entrepreneurs, you can't just walk away from the lake. You need the water. You need the network, the distribution, the cultural awareness.
Therefore, you must construct a lotus reed.
How does that look in the digital space?
In the digital space, your lotus reed might be utilizing third-party scheduling apps, so you never actually open the platform's native feed.
Oh, that's smart.
Right, or it might be employing strict app blockers that sever your access after 20 minutes. It could be a rigid, unbreakable personal policy against ever opening a comment section.
It's a technological or behavioral proxy that keeps the demon at bay.
Exactly.
Or applying it to that toxic corporate department you mentioned earlier. If you are forced to collaborate with a known manipulative entity within your company to complete a project, you can't just quit your job.
Not always, no.
So your lotus reed becomes structural. You document every single conversation in writing. You ensure a neutral third party is present on all calls. You never engage in informal, off-the-record chats.
It is the architecture of professional survival.
Yeah.
So the direct question for your reflection today is this. Identify a lake in your life right now. What is a situation, an environment, or a relationship that offers a resource you genuinely need, but that instinctively sets off your internal alarms?
Look closely at the mud on the shore. Are there missing footprints?
And once you confirm the presence of the demon, ask yourself, what is my lotus reed? How can I engineer a boundary that allows me to get the resource while remaining safely on the shore?
Don't jump in the lake. Engineer a reed. Because while the Monkey King brilliantly outmaneuvered the trap by pausing and observing, our final set of characters stumbled headfirst into the darkness due to a catastrophic lack of awareness.
We are moving from high-level strategic brilliance to what can only be described as a painful, highly relatable comedy of errors.
We really are. We're transitioning from the discipline of observation to the consequences of blind assumption.
Yes.
This final section of the source material is pieced together from several somewhat chaotic fragments, but the central narrative image is absolutely unforgettable.
It's quite the image.
We have a thief, and he is operating in pitch darkness. He is sneaking around, relying entirely on touch and assumption. He reaches out and bites down hard on what he firmly believes is some food or perhaps a rope to secure his footing.
He's desperate.
The text is slightly ambiguous on his exact intent, but he is acting aggressively on the belief that he is grabbing onto something safe and beneficial.
He is operating with incomplete data, driven entirely by his own greed and momentum.
But he hasn't bitten into food or a rope. He has accidentally clamped his jaw down onto the tail of a demon.
Or a fiend, depending on the translation you read.
Right, and he is bitten down incredibly hard. The demon immediately wakes up, enraged. In that split second, the thief realizes his catastrophic error.
The ultimate oh no moment.
But he is paralyzed by terror. He knows with absolute certainty that if he opens his mouth and lets go of the tail, the demon will instantly turn around and devour him in the dark.
The physical manifestation of his psychological entrapment is just striking.
So the thief is trapped. He is in dreadful, agonizing pain, literally grinding his teeth together to keep his jaw locked, entirely unable to let go. And what is his strategy?
What is he doing?
He is just waiting for twilight. He is waiting for the sun to come up, passively hoping that the arrival of daylight will somehow magically resolve the situation and save him.
Wow.
Alongside this main story, the text mentioned other chaotic vignettes too. A hunchback caught in a convoluted, duplicitous intrigue with a lover. 3 different people foolishly trying to purchase the exact same house and getting deadlocked. Someone being whirled around in total confusion.
The author is painting a really sweeping portrait of a society where everyone is attempting to outsmart each other through duplicity, and as a result, they all end up paralyzed and stuck in traps of their own making.
So if I'm looking at the underlying mechanism here, the thief biting the demon's tail feels like the ultimate, inevitable consequence of that thousand-wit arrogance we discussed at the very beginning.
It circles right back.
You think you were so incredibly clever, sneaking around in the dark, cutting corners. You act blindly, driven by the appetite for a quick win, and you end up clamped onto a monster, too early terrified to let go.
There is a dark, tragicomedy to it.
He literally bit off more than he could chew, and now he just has to sit there in agony.
It is deeply humorous, but the behavioral economics embedded in the story are profound. If we synthesize these bizarre vignettes, the thief's paralysis, the hunchback's failed intrigue, the real estate deadlock, with the text's broader thematic focus on statecraft, treaties, and alliances, a stark pattern emerges.
What's the pattern?
Duplicity inevitably creates a trap primarily for the deceiver. When you weave a complex web of lies or operate without integrity, you're almost always the one who gets entangled.
Right. The hunchback tries to run a scam and traps himself. The thief tries to steal in the dark and catches a demon.
Exactly.
But beyond the moral warning against duplicity, there was a very specific psychological mechanism at play here. When I read about the thief refusing to open his mouth, enduring the pain because he's terrified of the consequence of letting go, my mind immediately went to the sunk cost fallacy.
That is the precise modern analog. Let's really unpack the behavioral mechanics of the thief's position. He initiated an action-biting down based on flawed information and absolute arrogance. A microsecond later, he receives new, accurate data. It is a demon. Now, the purely logical, rational course of action would be to immediately release the tail, accept the risk, and flee as fast as possible.
Cut your losses and run.
Yes.
But he doesn't. Why?
Because of the psychology of ego and the paralyzing fear of immediate consequences. The investment he has already made in this mistaken course of action, combined with his terror of the demon's reaction, completely overrides his logic.
So he just keeps his jaw clamped shut.
He actively chooses to endure chronic, dreadful pain grinding his teeth because the vulnerability required to change his position is just too frightening. He resorts to passive hope,
waiting for twilight,
hoping external environmental changes will resolve an internal crisis of his own making.
Waiting for twilight. That phrase is so devastating because it is exactly what we do. How many of us are sitting in the dark, grinding our teeth, waiting for twilight?
Far too many.
Let's take the classic example. Career entrapment. You take a job because the salary is fantastic. You bite down hard. But within 6 months, you realize the culture is deeply toxic. Your boss is an absolute tyrant, a literal demon.
You realize you have made a fundamental error in judgment.
Exactly. But instead of admitting the mistake, quitting, and facing the temporary vulnerability and financial stress of being unemployed, which is the equivalent of opening your mouth and running, you just clamp down harder.
You stay.
You stay. You develop chronic stress. You literally grind your teeth at night in your sleep, and you just wait. You wait for the boss to get transferred. You wait for the company to get bought out. You wait for twilight.
The hunchback's intrigue mirrors the exact same mechanism in our personal lives, too.
Oh, like relationships.
Yes. Consider the dynamic of staying in a deeply toxic romantic relationship. You enter the relationship ignoring massive red flags, or perhaps based on false pretenses just because you don't want to be alone. Very quickly, you realize you have attached yourself to a situation that causes you profound emotional pain.
you've bitten the demon's tail.
But because you have already invested 3 years of your life into this person, because your social circles are intertwined, the idea of initiating the breakup, the idea of letting go and facing the immediate acute fallout and the admission of failure feels infinitely more terrifying than the chronic low-grade pain of just staying.
It's easier to just endure.
So you stay clamped on, you wait for them to change, or you wait for circumstances to force a separation.
The thief's real problem isn't the demon. I mean, the demon is just existing. The thief's real problem is his own ego.
It is entirely his ego.
Letting go requires an incredibly painful admission. It requires standing up and saying, I was foolish, I operated in the dark, I made a terrible mistake. The ego would rather endure physical torture than admit it was wrong.
The identity of the clever, stealthy thief is entirely shattered. He is reduced to a state of absolute, pathetic powerlessness, and it is entirely of his own making. Operating in the dark, which we must read metaphorically as operating without integrity, without clear boundaries, or without honest self-reflection, inevitably leads to these blind attachments.
So we arrive at the hardest part. The practical application. Because nobody wants to look in the mirror and admit they are the paralyzed thief in this scenario.
It requires an exercise in radical, deeply uncomfortable honesty.
So what's the reflection for the listener?
The reflection for you, the listener, is this. Where in your life are you currently holding on to a demon's tail? What is the specific job, relationship, investment, or grudge that is causing you constant grinding pain, but you are refusing to release it simply because you are terrified of the immediate fallout?
And once you identify the demon, how do you actually execute the release? How do you override that terror?
You must consciously stop waiting for twilight. The thief's fatal flaw was passive hope. He abdicated his agency to the sun. External circumstances rarely, if ever, resolve our internal self-deceptions.
You have to do it yourself.
Letting go requires accepting the immediate pain, the ego hit, and the acute vulnerability of the mistake. It means deliberately opening your mouth, facing the demon for a terrifying moment, and running back into the light on your own 2 feet. It requires the courage to dismantle your own trap.
You have to save yourself.
Yeah.
Twilight isn't coming. And I think that realization perfectly crystallizes the entire journey we've taken through these texts today.
It really functions as a cohesive, sequential curriculum on the nature of reality and self-deception.
It does. We started with the sheer arrogance of the thousand-wit fish, who proved that massive intellectual processing power is entirely useless, even fatal, if it isn't grounded in the immediate reality of a descending net. We moved to the weaver, who demonstrated how a sudden, miraculous opportunity can be instantly hijacked if you allow parasitic, ego-driven advisors to isolate you from your foundational roots.
The toxic friend.
Then we analyzed the brilliant strategic discipline of the monkey chief, who survived by noticing the negative space, the footprints that weren't there, and engineered a lotus reed to extract value without getting consumed.
A masterclass in restraint.
And finally, we looked at the thief who trapped himself in a state of agonizing paralysis because his ego wouldn't let him admit a mistake made in the dark.
It is a profound counter-narrative to modern culture. We spend so much of our finite energy attempting to acquire 1,000 wits. We chase the prestige, the algorithmic complexity, the ultimate convoluted life hacks, believing that complexity equals safety.
But it doesn't.
Or, like the weaver, we exist in a state of perpetual longing for a magical boon, hoping a sudden windfall or a sudden promotion will bypass the need for structural change in our lives. We seek grand, sweeping, systemic solutions to fundamental human problems.
We want to be the smartest person in the room holding the magic ticket.
We do. But the enduring truth beneath all these ancient allegories, the wisdom originally designed to keep kings alive in a treacherous world, is something much quieter and far more grounded. Perhaps the absolute highest form of wisdom is simply possessing the humility to look down at the mud at your feet, to utilize a basic heuristic when the net is falling, to notice which way the footprints are pointing before you take a drink, to recognize when your jaw is clamped onto something toxic and possessing the sheer bravery to open your mouth and let it go. It is the triumph of grounded, present awareness over the illusions of the intellect.
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.